The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Bagram Airfield as Captain Sarah Chun walked toward the briefing room. Her flight suit was crisp, her boots polished, but the whispers followed her like smoke. She had heard them countless times before, variations of the same theme that had plagued her entire military career. "Look at her trying to be one of the boys," muttered Staff Sergeant Rodriguez to his buddy near the fuel depot. "Combat pilot, my ass. She's probably never seen real action." Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. At 28, she had more flight hours than most of the men twice her age, but somehow that never seemed to matter. Her record spoke for itself. Top of her class at the Air Force Academy, distinguished graduate from pilot training, and expert marksman. Yet here, she was still fighting the same battles her mother had warned her about when she decided to pursue a career in military aviation. The briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-mission chatter. 12 pilots sat scattered across metal folding chairs, studying maps and checking equipment. Colonel Mike Thompson stood at the front, his weathered face serious as he prepared to address the group. "Listen up, people," Thompson barked, and the room fell silent. "We've got a situation developing in the Korengal Valley. Bravo Company is pinned down by Taliban forces approximately 15 clicks northeast of here. They've been under heavy fire for 6 hours." Sarah leaned forward, her training kicking in as she absorbed every detail. The Korengal Valley was known as the Valley of Death among American forces, a narrow, treacherous corridor where ambushes were common and escape routes were limited. Intelligence suggests at least 40 enemy combatants have them surrounded. Thompson continued, pointing to locations on the large tactical map. "They're running low on ammunition, and we've got 3 wounded who need immediate medical evacuation." Captain Jake Morrison, a swaggering pilot from Texas who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his supposed superiority, raised his hand. "Sir, what's the terrain like? Can we get close enough for effective support?" Thompson's expression darkened. "That's the problem, Morrison. The valley is surrounded by ridgelines that make it a nightmare for close air support. The enemy has positioned themselves perfectly to use the terrain against us." Sarah studied the map intently, her mind already calculating approach angles and potential solutions. She had spent countless hours studying this exact type of scenario, had run simulations that prepared her for situations just like this one. "The weather's not helping either," Thompson added. "We've got low visibility, possible storms rolling in from the west. This isn't going to be a walk in the park." Lieutenant Colonel Davis, the squadron's second-in-command, stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps we should consider waiting for better conditions." "The risk assessment, there is no waiting," Thompson cut him off. "Those soldiers don't have the luxury of time. Every minute we delay increases the chances we lose American lives." Sarah raised her hand. "Colonel, I've studied missions like this extensively. If we approach from the eastern ridge and use the terrain to mask our approach, we could get close enough to provide effective suppression fire while the evacuation helicopters extract the wounded." The room went quiet. A few pilots exchanged glances, and she could almost hear their thoughts. Here was the woman again, trying to prove herself by volunteering for the most dangerous missions. Morrison snorted. "Chun, this isn't a textbook exercise. This is real combat, with real bullets flying. Maybe you should sit this one out and let the experienced pilots handle it." Heat flashed across Sarah's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I have over 2,000 flight hours, including combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. My experience is documented in my service record. Flying supply runs, and reconnaissance isn't the same as close air support in hostile territory," chimed in Captain Peters, another pilot who had never missed an opportunity to undermine her. "This requires precision and nerves that, well, let's just say not everyone has what it takes." Colonel Thompson held up his hand to silence the growing murmur. "Enough. Chun, you're right about the approach strategy, but I'm assigning Morrison as lead on this mission. You'll fly as his wingman." Sarah bit back her response. She knew the eastern approach better than anyone in that room. She had spent her free time studying the topographical maps, understanding wind patterns, and defensive positions. But, once again, she would be relegated to supporting role while someone else got the credit. "Sir," she said carefully, "with respect, I believe my analysis of the terrain gives me the best chance of successfully executing this mission." Morrison laughed outright. "Listen, sweetheart, analysis is one thing. Actually flying through enemy fire while maintaining target acquisition is something completely different. Why don't you stay back and help with communications?" The condescension in his voice made something snap inside Sarah, but years of military discipline kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that showing emotion only gave them more ammunition to use against her. Thompson looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "The decision is made. Morrison leads, Chun flies wing. We launch in 30 minutes. As the briefing broke up, Sarah gathered her gear and headed toward the flight line. She could hear Morrison behind her, still talking to his buddies about how women didn't belong in combat aircraft. "I'm telling you, Davis, she's going to freeze up when the bullets start flying," Morrison was saying. "It's not her fault. It's just biology. Women aren't wired for this kind of pressure." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she kept walking. She had been proving men like Morrison wrong her entire career. Today would be no different. At her aircraft, she ran through her pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. The A-10 Thunderbolt was built for close air support. Its massive GU-8 cannon capable of destroying enemy positions with devastating accuracy. She knew every system, every capability, every limitation of the aircraft better than she knew her own reflection. Chief Master Sergeant Williams, her crew chief, approached with a concerned expression. "Captain, I heard about the mission briefing. You sure you're ready for this?" Sarah looked up from her checklist. Williams had been working on aircraft longer than she had been alive, and his opinion mattered to her more than most. "I was born ready, Chief. This is what I trained for." Williams nodded slowly. "I've seen you fly, ma'am. You've got skills most of these hotshots can only dream about. Don't let their words get inside your head." "I won't," she promised, though she could feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Every mission felt like a test, every flight an opportunity for her critics to point out her supposed inadequacies. As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah caught sight of Morrison strutting toward his own aircraft. He was laughing with his wingman, probably sharing another joke about women pilots. Let them laugh, she thought. When Bravo Company needed them most, she would be there. The radio crackled to life as she completed her engine start sequence. "Viper Flight, this is Tower. You're cleared for takeoff on runway 27. Weather update. Visibility is decreasing, and we've got scattered thunderstorms developing to the west." Sarah keyed her microphone. "Tower, Viper 2. Copy, weather update. Ready for takeoff." As her aircraft rolled down the runway, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every combat mission. But this time was different. This time, she carried the weight of proving not just her own capabilities, but challenging the assumptions that had followed her throughout her career. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, and Sarah banked to follow Morrison's lead. Below them, the Afghan landscape stretched out like a moonscape, all browns and grays punctuated by jagged mountain ranges. Somewhere out there, 12 American soldiers were fighting for their lives, counting on pilots like her to bring them home safely. She checked her weapons systems one final time and settled in for what she knew would be the most important flight of her career. The voices of doubt might follow her everywhere, but in the cockpit, surrounded by sophisticated avionics and lethal weapons systems, Sarah Chun was exactly where she belonged. The flight to the Korangal Valley took 23 minutes, but every second felt weighted with anticipation. Sarah maintained perfect formation behind Morrison's aircraft, watching the terrain change from relatively flat desert to the jagged peaks and narrow valleys that made this region so dangerous for both ground forces and aircraft. "Viper Flight, this is Hammer Base," came the voice of the forward air controller over the radio. "Bravo Company is taking heavy fire from multiple positions along the ridgeline. We need immediate suppression on grid coordinates I'm about to send you. Sarah copied down the coordinates and quickly plotted them on her map. The enemy positions were exactly where she had predicted during the briefing. High ground with excellent fields of fire and multiple escape routes. It was a textbook ambush position, and whoever was commanding the Taliban forces knew what they were doing. Viper 1, this is Viper 2, Sarah called Morrison on their tactical frequency. I'm showing the target coordinates put enemy forces on the eastern ridge, approximately 2,000 feet above the valley floor. Recommend we approach from the south to avoid their primary fields of fire. Morrison's voice came back sharp and dismissive. Negative, Viper 2. We're going in from the north as planned. Follow my lead and keep your mouth shut. Sarah bit back her response. The northern approach would take them directly into the enemy's kill zone, where the Taliban fighters could engage them with everything they had. But Morrison was the mission commander, and military protocol demanded she follow his orders. As they approached the valley, Sarah could see the smoke rising from multiple explosion sites. The sounds of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, carried on radio transmissions from the trapped soldiers below. She could hear the strain in their voices, the way trained professionals sounded when they were running low on options. Hammer Base, this is Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, came a gravelly voice over the emergency frequency. We got 3 urgent medical evacuations, and we're down to our last magazines. We need those birds here now. Copy, Rodriguez, replied the air controller. Viper flight is inbound. Estimated time to target 2 minutes. Sarah checked her weapons one more time. Her aircraft carried a full load of 30mm rounds for the GU, 8 cannon, plus Maverick missiles, and bombs specifically designed for close air support. Everything was functioning perfectly, but she knew that hardware was only as good as the pilot flying it. Viper 1, we're approaching the target area. Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. I've got visual on enemy muzzle flashes along the eastern ridge. Sarah looked where Morrison was indicating and immediately saw the problem. Viper 1, those positions are secondary. The primary fire is coming from the western ridge. Coordinates. She rattled off the number she had calculated based on the tracers she could see from the ground. Negative. Morrison replied curtly. I'm the mission commander. We engage the eastern ridge first. Against her better judgment, Sarah followed Morrison as he began his attack run. Almost immediately, the radio exploded with chatter as ground-based air defenses opened up on them. Green tracers filled the air around both aircraft, and Sarah heard the distinctive whine of bullets passing close to her cockpit. Morrison's attack was ineffective, his shots landing in empty positions that the enemy had already abandoned. Worse, his northern approach had exposed both aircraft to the very air defenses Sarah had tried to warn him about. Taking fire. Taking fire. Morrison's voice was suddenly high-pitched with panic. I've got warning lights across my instrument panel. Sarah watched in horror as smoke began trailing from Morrison's aircraft. His engine was clearly damaged, and he was losing altitude rapidly. Viper 1, what's your status? She called. I'm hit bad, Morrison replied, and she could hear the fear in his voice. Hydraulics are gone. Engine is failing. I need to get out of here. Viper 2, this is Hammer Base. The air controller's voice cut in. Viper 1 is aborting. You need to continue the mission. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Morrison was limping away from the battle, his aircraft trailing smoke and losing altitude. That left her alone against an unknown number of enemy fighters with sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons. Hammer Base, request guidance on target priorities, Sarah called, buying herself time to assess the situation. Viper 2, Bravo Company is taking casualties. We need suppression fire on all enemy positions immediately. Sarah banked hard to the left, using a mountain peak to break the enemy's line of sight while she planned her approach. Everything Morrison had done wrong was now her opportunity to do right. She had studied this exact scenario dozens of times, had run simulations that prepared her for exactly this moment. Hammer Base, I'm going to approach from the southeast using the terrain to mask my run until the last possible moment, Sarah transmitted. Once I engage, the enemy will focus on me. Use that opportunity to extract your wounded. Copy, Viper 2. Be advised, we're tracking at least 6 different firing positions along both ridgelines. 6 positions meant at least 24 enemy fighters, possibly more. Sarah did quick calculations in her head: ammunition, fuel, approach angles, escape routes. She would get 1 good pass, maybe 2 if she was lucky. She dove low, using the valley floor to stay below the enemy's radar. The rocky terrain flashed past her canopy at terrifying speed, but Sarah kept her aircraft steady and on course. This was what she had trained for: precision flying in the worst possible conditions. Bravo Company, this is Viper 2, she called on the ground frequency. I'm inbound from the southeast. Mark your positions with smoke so I don't hit friendlies. Roger, Viper 2. Popping smoke now. Purple smoke began rising from the American positions, clearly marking the line between friendly and enemy forces. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from multiple Taliban positions, all concentrated on the small group of soldiers trapped in the valley below. She pulled her aircraft into a climbing turn, bringing her nose up toward the western ridge where the heaviest fire was coming from. Her targeting system locked onto the first position, and she squeezed the trigger. The Ju-8 cannon roared to life, sending a stream of 30mm rounds into the enemy position. Rock and dirt exploded skyward as the depleted uranium rounds tore through the Taliban fighters' cover. Sarah immediately shifted to the next target, walking her fire along the ridgeline with deadly precision. Return fire erupted from every direction. Tracers streaked past her aircraft, and she heard the distinctive ping of small arms fire hitting her armored cockpit. But Sarah kept her focus on the task at hand, systematically destroying each enemy position. Viper 2, you're taking heavy fire, warned the air controller. Recommend you break off and reassess. Negative, Sarah replied calmly. I've got good target locks. Continuing the attack. She rolled inverted and dove toward the eastern ridge, where Morrison had failed to engage the enemy properly. Her cannon found its mark again, and she watched through her targeting pod as enemy fighters scattered from their positions. But the Taliban weren't finished. As Sarah pulled out of her dive, a shoulder-fired missile streaked toward her aircraft. She immediately deployed chaff and flares while pulling hard to the left, feeling the G-forces press her deep into her seat. The missile detonated close enough to rattle her aircraft, and several warning lights illuminated on her instrument panel. But the A-10 was built to take damage and keep flying. Sarah checked her systems quickly. Everything critical was still functioning. Hammer Base, this is Bravo Company, came Rodriguez's voice over the radio. Enemy fire has ceased. We can see the birds coming in for extraction. Outstanding work, Viper 2. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, but the mission wasn't over yet. She still had ammunition, and there were more enemy positions to neutralize. As the medical helicopters swooped into the valley to evacuate the wounded, Sarah continued to circle overhead, ready to engage any threat that revealed itself. The rescue operation took 12 tense minutes. Sarah watched through her targeting systems as medics loaded wounded soldiers onto stretchers and carried them to the waiting helicopters. Every second felt like an hour, knowing that enemy reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Finally, the helicopters lifted off with their precious cargo, and the remaining members of Bravo Company began their tactical withdrawal from the valley. Sarah provided overwatch until every American soldier was safely out of the kill zone. Viper 2, this is Hammer Base, the air controller called as she turned for home. Outstanding mission. Bravo Company reports all personnel accounted for. 3 wounded successfully evacuated. As Sarah flew back toward Bagram, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. It was Morrison, his voice subdued and different from the cocky pilot who had dismissed her capabilities just hours earlier. Viper 2, this is Viper 1. I wanted to say, well, you saved those soldiers down there. You did what I couldn't do. Sarah keyed her microphone, but kept her response professional. Viper 1, we're all on the same team. Glad you made it back safely. But inside, she felt something shift. For the first time in her career, a fellow pilot had acknowledged not just her competence, but her superiority in a combat situation. It was a small victory, but an important one. The debriefing room felt different when Sarah walked in 2 hours after landing. The usual bravado and casual dismissal she had grown accustomed to were replaced by something she had rarely experienced in her military career: respectful silence. Word of what happened in the Korangal Valley had spread quickly through the base, and everyone knew that Morrison had failed where Sarah had succeeded. Colonel Thompson sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by intelligence officers and mission analysts. Morrison was already there, his flight suit stained with hydraulic fluid from his damaged aircraft. His usual swagger was notably absent as he stared at his hands. "Let's start with you, Morrison," Thompson said, his voice carefully neutral. "Walk me through what happened from your perspective." Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sir, we approached the target area as briefed. I began my attack run on what I believed were the primary enemy positions. Almost immediately, we came under heavy anti-aircraft fire. My aircraft took multiple hits, and I was forced to abort the mission." Thompson nodded and turned to Sarah. "Captain Chun, your assessment of the situation?" Sarah chose her words carefully. Military protocol demanded she respect the chain of command, even when that command had failed. "Sir, the enemy positions were well concealed and heavily defended. When Viper 1 was forced to withdraw, I continued the mission using an alternate approach that minimized exposure to enemy fire while maximizing target effectiveness. The ground controller reported that you neutralized 6 separate enemy positions in a single attack run," Thompson said, consulting his notes. "How were you able to accomplish what Morrison couldn't?" Sarah felt every eye in the room on her. This was the moment that could define not just her career, but how female pilots would be perceived in combat roles for years to come. "Sir, I spent considerable time studying the terrain and enemy tactics in this specific area. The eastern approach Viper 1 attempted exposed our aircraft to the enemy's predetermined kill zones. By approaching from the southeast and using the terrain to mask my attack, I was able to achieve tactical surprise." Major Stevens, the squadron intelligence officer, leaned forward. "Chun, your mission report indicates you engaged targets while taking significant enemy fire. Most pilots would have broken off after the first missile lock." "The A-10 is designed to operate in high-threat environments," Sarah replied. "My training prepared me to continue the mission despite enemy countermeasures." Morrison finally looked up from his hands. "Chun, I want to say something." The room went quiet. "I've been flying combat missions for 8 years, and I've never seen flying like what you did today. You saved 12 lives while under fire that would have sent most pilots running." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Sarah had waited her entire career for a moment like this, recognition from a fellow pilot that her skills were not just adequate, but exceptional. Thompson made a note in his file. "Chun, I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. What you accomplished today goes far beyond normal pilot duties." As the debriefing concluded, Sarah gathered her gear and headed for the door. But Major Stevens caught up with her in the hallway. "Captain, I wanted to speak with you privately," he said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "We've been monitoring Taliban communications in the area where you conducted your mission." Sarah stopped walking. "What kind of communications, sir?" Stevens pulled out a classified folder. "Intelligence indicates there's a much larger operation plan for that region. What you encountered today was just an advance element. We're talking about a coordinated assault on multiple American positions using sophisticated weapons and tactics." The implications hit Sarah immediately. How many American personnel are at risk? "Potentially hundreds," Stevens replied grimly. "The problem is, after what happened to Morrison today, command is reluctant to send aircraft back into that area. The Taliban have clearly upgraded their air defense capabilities." Sarah felt a chill. "What's the timeline for this assault?" Our best estimate is 72 hours, maybe less. They're moving weapons and personnel into position as we speak. Stevens closed the folder and looked directly at Sarah. Chun, I've reviewed the gun camera footage from your mission today. Your flying was unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of military service. If we're going to stop this assault before it happens, we need pilots with your capabilities. That evening, Sarah sat in her small quarters, staring at the mission folder Stevens had given her. The intelligence was sobering. Satellite imagery showed Taliban forces moving into positions that would allow them to attack American bases throughout the region simultaneously. The coordination required suggested involvement from experienced foreign fighters, possibly former military personnel from other countries. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her father calling from Colorado. Sarah, I heard about your mission today through some of my old contacts, retired Air Force Colonel Davidson said without preamble. Word is you pulled off something remarkable. Sarah smiled. Her father had been her greatest supporter throughout her career, even when his own military colleagues questioned his daughter's choice to pursue combat aviation. Dad, I just did my job, she replied. Bullshit, her father said bluntly. I've been around military aviation for 30 years. What you did today was exceptional by any standard. But I'm calling because I'm worried about you. What do you mean? Sarah, when you prove yourself at this level, the missions only get harder. People are going to start asking you to do things that other pilots can't or won't do. That's both an honor and a burden. Her father's words proved prophetic. The next morning, Sarah was summoned to Colonel Thompson's office for what was described as a special briefing. When she arrived, she found Thompson accompanied by a man she didn't recognize, a colonel with special operations insignia. Captain Chun, this is Colonel Marcus Webb from Special Operations Command, Thompson said. He has a proposition for you. Webb stood and shook Sarah's hand with a grip that suggested he took physical fitness seriously. Captain, I've reviewed the footage from your mission yesterday. I've also spoken with the soldiers you saved. They speak very highly of your abilities. Sarah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. We have a situation developing that requires a pilot with very specific capabilities, Webb continued. Intelligence indicates a high-value Taliban leader is planning to meet with foreign advisors at a compound deep in enemy territory. This individual is responsible for coordinating attacks that have killed dozens of American soldiers. Webb opened a map on Thompson's desk. The target is here, approximately 60 miles inside Taliban-controlled territory. The compound is heavily defended, and we estimate at least 50 enemy fighters in the immediate area. Sarah studied the map. The location was in the heart of some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan, surrounded by mountains that would make both approach and escape extremely difficult. Sir, what exactly are you asking me to do? Webb's expression was grave. We need someone to provide close air support for a special operations team that will assault the compound. The mission requires precision flying in extremely hostile conditions with minimal backup. Most importantly, it requires a pilot who won't break under pressure. Thompson leaned forward. Chun, I want to be clear about something. This is a volunteer mission. No one will think less of you if you decline. Sarah looked between the two colonels. After yesterday's success, she had earned a level of respect she had never experienced before. She could probably cruise through the rest of her deployment, taking routine missions while basking in her newfound reputation. But that wasn't who she was. She hadn't spent years fighting for recognition just to play it safe when it mattered most. When do we launch? She asked. Webb smiled grimly. 48 hours. And Chun? The Special Operations Team specifically requested you for this mission. They said after what you did yesterday, you're the only pilot they trust with their lives. As Sarah left the colonel's office, she felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders again. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't fighting to prove herself. She was fighting because others believed in her abilities. The next 2 days would test everything she had learned about flying, combat, and herself. More importantly, the success or failure of the mission could determine whether the Taliban's planned assault on American forces would succeed or fail. As she walked across the tarmac toward her aircraft for a test flight, Sarah could see Morrison and several other pilots watching her with something that might have been respect. The transformation was remarkable. Where once they had seen a woman trying to play in a man's world, they now saw a combat pilot whose abilities exceeded their own. But Sarah knew that respect was fragile. One mistake, one moment of hesitation or poor judgment, and she would be back to fighting the same battle she had faced her entire career. The difference was that now, other people's lives depended on her not making those mistakes. She climbed into her cockpit and began her pre-flight checks. Already mentally preparing for what promised to be the most dangerous mission of her life, the pre-dawn darkness at Bagram Airfield was broken only by the harsh white lights illuminating the Special Operations Briefing Facility. Sarah sat among 12 Special Forces operators, studying detailed satellite imagery of their target. These weren't regular soldiers. They were the military's elite, men who had conducted hundreds of dangerous missions in the world's most hostile environments. Master Sergeant Tom Fletcher, the team leader, pointed to locations on the large tactical display. The compound sits on a plateau approximately 3,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by steep terrain on 3 sides. Intelligence indicates our target will be meeting with at least 6 foreign advisors sometime between 0300 and 0500 hours. Sarah studied the approach routes carefully. The compound was positioned like a fortress with natural defensive barriers that would make a ground assault extremely difficult. But those same barriers would also limit her ability to provide close air support if things went wrong. "What's our extraction plan?" asked Sergeant First Class Martinez, the team's communications specialist. Fletcher's expression was grim. 2 helicopters will be standing by approximately 20 miles from the target. But if we get pinned down, Captain Chun is our only immediate support until the cavalry can arrive. All eyes turned to Sarah. She had been in combat situations before, but this was different. These men were volunteering to walk into the heart of enemy territory, with only her aircraft between them and disaster. "Ma'am," said Staff Sergeant Jackson, the team's youngest member, "we've all heard about what you did in the Karengal Valley. The guys from Bravo Company can't stop talking about how you saved their lives." Sarah felt a familiar mix of pride and pressure. "Gentlemen, I want you to know that I'll be overhead from the moment you touch down until you're safely extracted. My job is to make sure you complete your mission and get home." Colonel Webb stepped forward with a classified folder. "Captain, there's something else you need to know. Intelligence has detected increased radio traffic, suggesting the Taliban knows something is happening. They may be expecting us." The implications were sobering. If the enemy knew they were coming, the compound would be even more heavily defended than originally estimated. Sarah would be flying into a prepared ambush with limited ammunition and no backup. Fletcher checked his watch. "Gentlemen, wheels up in 30 minutes. Chun, we'll be monitoring your frequency throughout the mission." As the Special Operations team gathered their gear, Sarah walked to the flight line where her 10 waited under the harsh spotlights. Chief Master Sergeant Williams was conducting final checks on her aircraft, his weathered face serious in the pre-dawn gloom. "Chief, how are we looking?" Sarah asked. Williams patted the side of the aircraft affectionately. "She's ready, Captain. Full ammunition load, maximum fuel, all systems checking green. But I have to ask, are you ready for this?" Sarah looked at the intimidating bulk of the Thunderbolt, its massive cannon and armored cockpit designed specifically for the kind of mission she was about to undertake. "I've been preparing for this my entire career, Chief. These men are counting on me. Ma'am, I've been working on aircraft for 28 years. I've seen a lot of pilots come and go. You got something special, the kind of instincts that can't be taught." Williams handed her the aircraft logbook. "Bring her home, Captain." Sarah climbed into her cockpit and began the familiar ritual of pre-flight checks. Every switch, every system, every backup procedure had to be perfect. There would be no margin for error once the mission began. The radio crackled to life as she started her engines. "Viper 2, this is Hammer Base. Weather update shows clear skies over the target area, but we're tracking possible thunderstorms developing to the northwest. Copy, Hammer Base. Viper 2 ready for departure." The flight to the target area took 45 minutes, giving Sarah time to review the mission profile one final time. She would establish a holding pattern 5 miles from the compound while the Special Operations team made their approach. Once they were in position, she would move closer to provide immediate support if needed. As she flew through the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. Every insult, every doubt, every person who had told her she didn't belong in a combat aircraft had led to this mission. 12 elite soldiers were depending on her to keep them alive in the most dangerous place on Earth. Viper 2, this is Razor Team, came Fletcher's voice over the radio. We're 5 minutes out from insertion point. Sarah checked her position and began setting up her patrol pattern. Below her, the Afghan landscape was a maze of valleys and ridgelines that had been the graveyard of armies for centuries. Somewhere in that darkness, the enemy was waiting. Razor Team, this is Viper 2. I have you on visual. Looking good from up here. She could see the faint heat signatures of the 12-man team through her thermal imaging system as they moved across the rocky terrain toward their objective. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals, maintaining perfect spacing and tactical awareness. 23 minutes later, Fletcher's voice came over the radio again, this time with an edge of tension. Viper 2. We're in position overlooking the compound, confirming multiple vehicles and armed guards. This is definitely the right place. Sarah moved her aircraft closer, staying just outside the range of small arms fire, while maintaining visual contact with both the Special Operations team and their target. Through her targeting systems, she could see the compound clearly. Several buildings surrounded by walls, with guards patrolling the perimeter. Razor Team, I count at least 8 guards outside, plus an unknown number inside the buildings, Sarah reported. Copy that, Viper 2. We're moving into assault position. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. As Razor Team approached the compound, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions. The Taliban hadn't just expected them. They had prepared a coordinated defense that turned the mission into a deadly trap. Taking heavy fire. Fletcher's voice was urgent, but controlled. We've got machine gun positions on the north and east walls. Request immediate close air support. Sarah didn't hesitate. She banked hard toward the compound, her targeting system already locked onto the muzzle flashes Fletcher had identified. The familiar weight of combat adrenaline settled over her as she lined up her first attack run. Razor Team, this is Viper 2. Guns hot coming in from the west. Keep your heads down. Her cannon roared to life, sending a stream of 30mm rounds into the nearest machine gun position. The concrete wall exploded in a shower of dust and debris, silencing the weapon that had been pinning down half of Fletcher's team. But the Taliban response was immediate and overwhelming. Tracers filled the air around her aircraft as multiple air defense positions opened fire simultaneously. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of bullets hitting her armored cockpit, but the A-10 was built to absorb damage and keep flying. Viper 2, you've got missiles in the air, warned Martinez from his position overlooking the compound. Sarah immediately deployed countermeasures while pulling into a hard climbing turn. 2 shoulder-fired missiles streaked past her aircraft, close enough that she could feel the heat through her canopy. On the ground, Razor Team was fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Instead of the dozen guards they had expected, at least 30 Taliban fighters had emerged from concealed positions throughout the compound. We're surrounded. Jackson's voice came over the radio. They've got us pinned down from 3 directions. Sarah rolled inverted and dove toward the compound, her cannon seeking new targets. She could see muzzle flashes from windows and rooftops as the Taliban fighters tried to overwhelm the American team through sheer volume of fire. Her second attack run was even more dangerous than the first. Enemy fire was concentrated and accurate, and she could feel her aircraft shuddering under the impact of multiple hits. Warning lights began illuminating across her instrument panel, but all critical systems remained functional. Razor Team, status report, she called as she pulled out of her dive. Fletcher's voice was strained. We've got 2 wounded, but we're still in the fight. That last run bought us some breathing room. Sarah checked her ammunition status. She had enough for maybe 2 more effective attack runs before she would be reduced to using her missiles. But the Special Operations team needed more than that. They needed sustained suppression fire to extract safely. It was then that Sarah made a decision that went against every rule of engagement she had been taught. Instead of maintaining safe altitude and conducting attack runs, she brought her aircraft down to less than 500 feet above the compound and began flying in a tight circle, her cannon continuously engaging any enemy position that revealed itself. "Viper 2, what are you doing?" came an urgent transmission from Hammer Base. "You're well below minimum safe altitude in a high-threat environment." Sarah ignored the warning. At this altitude, she was a sitting duck for enemy fire, but she was also providing the kind of close, sustained support that Razor Team needed to survive. For the next 8 minutes, Sarah's A-10 circled the compound like an angry hornet, her cannon systematically destroying enemy positions while absorbing tremendous amounts of return fire. Her aircraft was taking a beating. Hydraulics were failing, multiple warning systems were screaming, and fuel was leaking from punctured tanks. But her tactics were working. The sustained pressure from her aircraft gave Fletcher's team the opportunity they needed to regroup and begin fighting their way toward the extraction point. "Viper 2, this is Razor Team. We're moving to the extraction point. Can you provide cover for our withdrawal?" Sarah checked her systems. Her aircraft was badly damaged, leaking fuel, and operating on backup hydraulics. Any reasonable pilot would have broken off the engagement and headed for base immediately. "Negative, Razor Team. I'm staying until you're clear." For the next 15 minutes, Sarah provided overwatch as the 12-man team fought their way through enemy territory toward their extraction helicopters. Every time Taliban fighters tried to pursue or set up an ambush, her cannon would rain destruction from above. Finally, Fletcher's voice came over the radio with words Sarah had been hoping to hear. "Viper 2, Razor Team is secure. Mission complete. You can head home." As Sarah turned her damaged aircraft toward Bagram, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. The mission had been successful, but more importantly, 12 elite soldiers were heading home safely because she had been there when they needed her most. The flight back to base was tense. Her aircraft was barely flyable, and she had to nurse it through the sky using backup systems and careful flight management. But Chief Williams was waiting on the tarmac when she finally touched down, his face breaking into a rare smile as he saw her aircraft taxi to a stop. The morning sun painted the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of gold and purple as Sarah walked across the tarmac at Bagram Airfield. 3 weeks had passed since the Special Operations mission, and word of her actions had spread far beyond the confines of her squadron. The damaged A-10 she had flown home that night was still in the maintenance hangar, a testament to both the aircraft's durability and the intensity of the combat she had endured. Chief Master Sergeant Williams approached her with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Captain, I wanted to show you something before the ceremony starts." He led her to where her aircraft sat in the hangar, surrounded by maintenance equipment and technicians. The damage was extensive. Bullet holes peppered the fuselage, hydraulic lines had been severed, and portions of the wing had been damaged by missile fragments. It was remarkable the aircraft had remained flyable at all. "Chief, how bad is it really?" Sarah asked, running her hand along one of the larger holes in the aircraft side. Williams shook his head in amazement. "Ma'am, in 30 years of aircraft maintenance, I've never seen a bird take this much damage and still bring its pilot home. You had backup systems running backup systems. By all rights, this aircraft should have been unflyable 20 minutes before you landed." Sarah studied the damage pattern. Every hole told a story of the 8-minute gun run she had conducted over the compound, flying in a tight circle while absorbing everything the Taliban could throw at her. "The engineers from McDonnell Douglas want to study this aircraft," Williams continued. "They're calling it one of the most impressive demonstrations of the A-10's survivability ever documented." As they talked, Master Sergeant Fletcher appeared in the hangar entrance, dressed in his service uniform rather than combat gear. Behind him were the other 11 members of Razor Team, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the unfamiliar setting of an aircraft maintenance facility. "Captain Chun," Fletcher called out as he approached. "We want to speak with you before the ceremony." Sarah turned to face the Special Operations Team, surprised by their formal demeanor. These were men she had come to know through radio transmissions during some of the most intense moments of their lives. "Ma'am," Fletcher began, his voice carrying unusual emotion, "we've been in a lot of tight spots over the years. We've worked with a lot of pilots, some of them very good. But what you did that night—" He paused, searching for words. Staff Sergeant Jackson stepped forward. "Captain, when you brought your aircraft down to 500 feet and started that continuous gun run, you broke every rule in the book. But you also saved our lives." Sergeant Martinez nodded in agreement. "Ma'am, we've talked about this mission every day since it happened. What you did wasn't just brave, it was the kind of flying that legends are made of." Sarah felt overwhelmed by their words. These were some of the most elite soldiers in the American military, and they were treating her with a level of respect she had rarely experienced. "Gentlemen, I was just doing my job," she replied. "You would have done the same for me." Fletcher shook his head. "No, ma'am. With respect, most pilots wouldn't have done what you did. When you made the decision to stay at low altitude and provide sustained fire support, you put your life on the line for hours. That's something we'll never forget." An hour later, Sarah found herself standing in front of a formation of several hundred military personnel. The award ceremony was being held on the main tarmac, with aircraft and mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. In the front row, she could see Morrison and the other pilots from her squadron, their faces showing genuine respect rather than the skepticism she had grown accustomed to. Colonel Thompson stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled formation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to recognize extraordinary heroism in combat. Captain Sarah Chun has demonstrated the highest qualities of airmanship, courage, and dedication to her fellow service members." Thompson paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Over the past month, Captain Chun has conducted combat missions that have saved the lives of more than 20 American soldiers. Her actions during the Karengal Valley Rescue and the Special Operations Support Mission represent the finest traditions of military aviation." As Thompson read the citation for her Distinguished Flying Cross, Sarah's mind wandered to her father. He had flown similar missions during his own military career, but in an era when such recognition for female pilots was unthinkable. She knew he would be proud not just of her achievements, but of what those achievements meant for future generations of women in combat aviation. "Captain Chun," Thompson continued, "your willingness to engage superior enemy forces in extremely dangerous conditions while operating a severely damaged aircraft exemplifies the warrior spirit that defines our military. Your actions during the Special Operations mission, particularly your decision to conduct sustained low-altitude combat air patrol under intense enemy fire, prevented the loss of American lives and enabled mission success." As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Sarah caught sight of a familiar figure in the audience. It was Morrison, and for the first time since she had known him, he was applauding without reservation. After the ceremony, as the formation dispersed and people began moving toward the reception area, Morrison approached her with an expression she had never seen before: genuine humility. "Chun," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you several apologies." Sarah shook his hand, curious about what had prompted this change in attitude. Morrison continued, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened in the Karengal Valley and about what you've accomplished since then. I was wrong about you. Not just wrong, but stupidly, dangerously wrong." "Jake, we all make mistakes in—" "No," Morrison interrupted. "This wasn't a mistake. I let my ego and my prejudices cloud my judgment, and people could have died because of it. You're not just a good pilot, Chun. You're one of the best pilots I've ever seen, period." Other members of the squadron began gathering around them, and Sarah realized that Morrison's public acknowledgement was more significant than any medal she could receive. Captain Peters, who had been particularly vocal in his criticisms of female pilots, stepped forward. "Chun, I want to add my voice to Morrison's. We've all heard the radio recordings from your missions. What you've accomplished goes far beyond anything most of us could even attempt." The group was joined by Colonel Webb from Special Operations Command, who had flown in specifically for the ceremony. "Captain Chun, I wanted to personally thank you for what you did for my men. But I also wanted to let you know that word of your capabilities has reached some very high levels in the Pentagon." Sarah felt a mix of pride and apprehension. Recognition at high levels could mean opportunities, but it could also mean pressure and expectations that would be difficult to meet. "Sir, I'm honored by the recognition, but I hope people understand that I'm just one pilot doing my job." Webb smiled. "Captain, what you did during that special operations mission has been reviewed by senior leadership throughout the military. You've become a case study in combat aviation, proof that pilot skill and determination matter more than any demographic characteristic." As the reception continued, Sarah found herself surrounded by pilots, ground crews, and military personnel who wanted to congratulate her and share their own stories. But the moment that meant the most came when Chief Williams approached with a young female airman she didn't recognize. "Captain," Williams said, "I'd like you to meet Airman First Class Rebecca Martinez. She's in pilot training and requested to meet you." The young woman, barely out of her teens, looked at Sarah with obvious admiration. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. When I started pilot training, there were people who told me women couldn't handle combat flying. After hearing about your missions, I know that's not true." Sarah felt a profound sense of responsibility. Her actions weren't just about proving herself anymore. They were about opening doors for the women who would follow. "Airman Martinez," Sarah said, "the most important thing I can tell you is that being a good pilot has nothing to do with gender. It's about training, preparation, and never giving up when things get difficult." As the reception wound down and people began to disperse, Sarah walked back to the hangar where her damaged aircraft sat. The mechanics had been working around the clock to repair the extensive damage, and she could see progress in the patched holes and replaced components. Colonel Thompson joined her as she stood looking at the aircraft. "Chun, I want to speak with you about your next assignment. Given your performance here, you're going to have some interesting options." Sarah turned to face him. "Sir, I appreciate whatever opportunities might be available, but I want to stay here and continue flying combat missions." Thompson looked surprised. "Captain, you could write your own ticket at this point. Test pilot school, staff positions in Washington, instructor duty at the best training bases in the Air Force. Why would you want to stay in a combat zone?" Sarah thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Colonel, 3 months ago, people in this squadron questioned whether I belonged in a combat aircraft. Today, those same people are treating me as an equal, not because of my gender, but because of my abilities as a pilot." She gestured toward her damaged aircraft. "This airplane and I have been through a lot together. We've saved lives, completed impossible missions, and proven that skill and determination are what matter in combat. I'm not ready to give that up yet." Thompson nodded slowly. "I understand, Captain, but I hope you also understand that you've changed things for female pilots throughout the military. Your actions have had an impact far beyond what you might realize." As Thompson walked away, Sarah remained in the hangar with her aircraft. The past month had transformed her from someone fighting to prove herself into someone whose capabilities were unquestioned. But more importantly, she had helped change perceptions about what women could accomplish in combat roles. The road to this moment had been long and difficult, marked by countless small battles against prejudice and doubt. But standing in that hangar, surrounded by an aircraft that bore the scars of successful combat missions, Sarah Chun knew that she had finally found her place in military aviation. Tomorrow, there would be new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that pilot skill transcended any demographic characteristic. And she would be ready for all of them, knowing that her success opened doors for the women who would follow in her footsteps. The doubters had been silenced. not by arguments or politics, but by performance when lives were on the line. In the end, that was the only argument that mattered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Bagram Airfield as Captain Sarah Chun walked toward the briefing room. Her flight suit was crisp, her boots polished, but the whispers followed her like smoke. She had heard them countless times before, variations of the same theme that had plagued her entire military career. "Look at her, trying to be one of the boys," muttered Staff Sergeant Rodriguez to his buddy near the fuel depot. "Combat pilot my ass. She's probably never seen real action." Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. At 28, she had more flight hours than most of the men twice her age, but somehow that never seemed to matter. Her record spoke for itself. Top of her class at the Air Force Academy, distinguished graduate from pilot training, and expert marksman. Yet here she was, still fighting the same battles her mother had warned her about when she decided to pursue a career in military aviation. The briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-mission chatter. 12 pilots sat scattered across metal folding chairs, studying maps and checking equipment. Colonel Mike Thompson stood at the front, his weathered face serious as he prepared to address the group. "Listen up, people," Thompson barked, and the room fell silent. "We've got a situation developing in the Korangal Valley. Bravo Company is pinned down by Taliban forces approximately 15 clicks northeast of here. They've been under heavy fire for 6 hours." Sarah leaned forward, her training kicking in as she absorbed every detail. The Korangal Valley was known as the Valley of Death among American forces, a narrow, treacherous corridor where ambushes were common and escape routes were limited. Intelligence suggests at least 40 enemy combatants have them surrounded. Thompson continued, pointing to locations on the large tactical map. "They're running low on ammunition, and we've got 3 wounded who need immediate medical evacuation." Captain Jake Morrison, a swaggering pilot from Texas who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his supposed superiority, raised his hand. "Sir, what's the terrain like? Can we get close enough for effective support?" Thompson's expression darkened. "That's the problem, Morrison. The valley is surrounded by ridgelines that make a nightmare for close air support. The enemy has positioned themselves perfectly to use the terrain against us." Sarah studied the map intently, her mind already calculating approach angles and potential solutions. She had spent countless hours studying this exact type of scenario, had run simulations that prepared her for situations just like this one. "The weather's not helping either," Thompson added. "We've got low visibility, possible storms rolling in from the west. This isn't going to be a walk in the park." Lieutenant Colonel Davis, the squadron's second-in-command, stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps we should consider waiting for better conditions." "The risk assessment, there is no waiting," Thompson cut him off. "Those soldiers don't have the luxury of time. Every minute we delay increases the chances we lose American lives." Sarah raised her hand. "Colonel, I've studied missions like this extensively. If we approach from the eastern ridge and use the terrain to mask our approach, we could get close enough to provide effective suppression fire while the evacuation helicopters extract the wounded." The room went quiet. A few pilots exchanged glances, and she could almost hear their thoughts. Here was the woman again, trying to prove herself by volunteering for the most dangerous missions. Morrison snorted. "Chun, this isn't a textbook exercise. This is real combat, with real bullets flying. Maybe you should sit this one out and let the experienced pilots handle it." Heat flashed across Sarah's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I have over 2,000 flight hours, including combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. My experience is documented in my service record. Flying supply runs, and reconnaissance isn't the same as close air support in hostile territory," chimed in Captain Peters, another pilot who had never missed an opportunity to undermine her. "This requires precision and nerves that, well, let's just say not everyone has what it takes." Colonel Thompson held up his hand to silence the growing murmur. "Enough. Chun, you're right about the approach strategy, but I'm assigning Morrison as lead on this mission. You'll fly as his wingman." Sarah bit back her response. She knew the Eastern approach better than anyone in that room. She had spent her free time studying the topographical maps, understanding wind patterns, and defensive positions. But, once again, she would be relegated to supporting role while someone else got the credit. "Sir," she said carefully, "with respect, I believe my analysis of the terrain gives me the best chance of successfully executing this mission." Morrison laughed outright. "Listen, sweetheart, analysis is one thing. Actually flying through enemy fire while maintaining target acquisition is something completely different. Why don't you stay back and help with communications?" The condescension in his voice made something snap inside Sarah, but years of military discipline kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that showing emotion only gave them more ammunition to use against her. Thompson looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "The decision is made. Morrison leads, Chun flies wing. We launch in 30 minutes. As the briefing broke up, Sarah gathered her gear and headed toward the flight line. She could hear Morrison behind her, still talking to his buddies about how women didn't belong in combat aircraft. "I'm telling you, Davis, she's going to freeze up when the bullets start flying," Morrison was saying. "It's not her fault. It's just biology. Women aren't wired for this kind of pressure." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she kept walking. She had been proving men like Morrison wrong her entire career. Today would be no different. At her aircraft, she ran through her pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. The A-10 Thunderbolt was built for close air support. Its massive GU, 8 cannon capable of destroying enemy positions with devastating accuracy. She knew every system, every capability, every limitation of the aircraft better than she knew her own reflection. Chief Master Sergeant Williams, her crew chief, approached with a concerned expression. "Captain, I heard about the mission briefing. You sure you're ready for this?" Sarah looked up from her checklist. Williams had been working on aircraft longer than she had been alive, and his opinion mattered to her more than most. "I was born ready, Chief. This is what I trained for." Williams nodded slowly. "I've seen you fly, ma'am. You've got skills most of these hotshots can only dream about. Don't let their words get inside your head." "I won't," she promised, though she could feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Every mission felt like a test, every flight an opportunity for her critics to point out her supposed inadequacies. As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah caught sight of Morrison strutting toward his own aircraft. He was laughing with his wingman, probably sharing another joke about women pilots. Let them laugh, she thought. When Bravo Company needed them most, she would be there. The radio crackled to life as she completed her engine start sequence. "Viper Flight, this is Tower. You're cleared for takeoff on runway 27. Weather update. Visibility is decreasing, and we've got scattered thunderstorms developing to the west." Sarah keyed her microphone. "Tower, Viper 2. Copy, weather update. Ready for takeoff." As her aircraft rolled down the runway, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every combat mission. But this time was different. This time, she carried the weight of proving not just her own capabilities, but challenging the assumptions that had followed her throughout her career. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, and Sarah banked to follow Morrison's lead. Below them, the Afghan landscape stretched out like a moonscape, all browns and grays punctuated by jagged mountain ranges. Somewhere out there, 12 American soldiers were fighting for their lives, counting on pilots like her to bring them home safely. She checked her weapons systems one final time and settled in for what she knew would be the most important flight of her career. The voices of doubt might follow her everywhere, but in the cockpit, surrounded by sophisticated avionics and lethal weapons systems, Sarah Chun was exactly where she belonged.